Hi there. Can you hear me okay? Kind of a quiet group out there. My name is Rachel Hinman, and I'm a senior research scientist at the Nokia Research Center in Palo Alto, which is really just a fancy way of saying that I am a researcher and a designer. And the focus of my work is really exploring possible mobile technology experiences that are 2, 3, 5, or even 10 years in the future. And I'm super excited to have the opportunity to share this content with you guys today for two kind of big reasons. The first reason is that I spent the last 14 months writing a book entitled The Mobile Frontier with Rosenfeld Media, and this is one of the first times that I've been able to share the content from that book. Now, writing a book can be very solitary work, and being cooped up in your house, writing a book for 14 months gives you a really intimate understanding of why many writers become alcoholics. So it's awesome to be out in the world, especially in such a beautiful place like Portugal, and have the opportunity to share some of the ideas that I've been working on for the last year. And the second reason that I'm really excited to share this content is because I feel that we've really reached a point in the user experience community where mobile has arrived. For the longest time, when I would go to conferences like this, I really felt like most designers and UX professionals considered mobile to be this kind of new special thing that they were obliged to learn something about. But now, as more and more people are really engaging and experiencing mobile technology and what it's like to have access to information from almost anywhere, mobile is no longer this sort of niche topic area. It's really a given. And much like the internet before it, mobile is quickly becoming integrated into the way that people live. And as someone who's been doing mobile UX for a while, this is just a really wonderful and exciting thing to see. And I no longer have to come to conferences like this and convince people that mobile is important. Folks just kind of know it. In addition to being a designer, I'm a big US history buff, and I've long adored this picture. It's the iconic image of the Oklahoma land rush. And what this image depicts is an event that occurred on April 22nd of 1889. And on that day, an estimated 50,000 US pioneers lined up at the edge of what was then known as the unassigned lands within the United States to participate in what was one of the largest land rushes, land grabs, actually, that was ever recorded. And I've long loved this image because I think it really captures what I imagine the settlers on that day really felt. And that's the frenetic energy of unbound optimism. And today, I feel like the mobile UX space feels a lot like this image. It feels like the Wild West. And if I could get $5 for every time I heard this from someone, I could totally quit my day job. I'd be a rich gal. More people than ever are designing for mobile, which is completely awesome. I love it. And it's been a long time coming. The only really big beef that I have is that as more and more people start designing for mobile, I see this eerie sameness happening. I see things like this. People trying to optimize the Microsoft Office experience for a mobile device, or trying to replicate the physical world in the digital world with these sort of skeuomorphic interface designs. Or generally just trying to replicate the desktop experience on a mobile device. And I think these examples evidence a phenomenon that Canadian media scholar Marshall McLuhan coined the rearview mirror effect. Instead of seeing mobile devices as something new and something fundamentally different, we find ourselves relating the technology to known and understood experiences. And I love this quote, that even in situations in which a spirit of exploration and freedom exists, where we are free to experiment and work beyond the physical and social constraints, our cognitive habits often get in the way. It's the rearview mirror effect. We see the world through a rearview mirror, and we march backwards into the future. And that leads to the most important message of this presentation. If you take one thing away from this talk, I hope it's this. It's that mobile presents an opportunity to invent new ways for people to interact with information. And it's really that spirit of invention. I think that's what is the most exciting aspect of mobile user experience and that we should be exploring. And yet I don't really feel like we see enough of that. Humans have two legs, making us inherently mobile beings. And yet for the last 50 years, we've settled into a computing landscape that assumes a very static context of use. Too often, I see people in the mobile industry lean on the past instead of embracing the spirit of innovation and invention. And in the UX community, I see far too many people leaning on the methods and tools from the desktop era instead of seizing the creative opportunity mobile is really presenting us with. Now, I can understand why. The desktop has a lot of benefits: widespread acceptance and understanding of the paradigm by large bodies of users, common and well-documented UI conventions, standard input mechanisms, or the vast bodies of academic knowledge and design heuristics. Those benefits of the desktop computing world don't exist yet for mobile. They're still being invented. And yet I firmly believe invention really requires us to cast off anchors and embrace the unknown. Now, I understand that an invention may be all well and good, but as designers working in time and resource-constrained environments, exploring new unsettled landscapes can be daunting at best. Where do you look? So as someone whose job it is to kind of foresee where mobile is going, I have 3 topics that I wanted to share with you today. And now these are topics that I believe are emergent and will become important in the mobile experience field in the years to come, and they are shapeshifting, a brave new world, and comfortable computing. So let's start with shapeshifting. One important theme that I've seen become prevalent in the last 12 months to 2 years is now that people have multiple devices, there's this growing expectation that digital content flows seamlessly through all the devices in a user's ecosystem. Simply put, people want convergence. Instead of siloed experiences, they want experiences that can shapeshift between devices and contexts. Now, the best example of a truly convergent experience that I've found is from the Super Bowl commercial for the NFL in the United States. Now, the commercial depicts this man watching the same football game from a variety of devices in multiple contexts throughout the day. It's a great example of how content can seamlessly traverse multiple devices and contexts. Now, granted, this is a marketing piece, and it lies in sharp contrast to the reality that most of us face. Unfortunately, most content experiences for the web have been built using models that can't accommodate this desire. Instead, the web was built on a static model, the web page, and we've allowed those pages to become bloated and unwieldy. Web pages have become these monolithic boulders, and experiencing internet content on mobile devices feels like you're trying to suck information through a straw. Now, one of my favorite aspects of writing The Mobile Frontier was that I had the opportunity to interview some of my mobile design heroes. And one theme that came through in all of those interviews was the troublesome nature of the web page in this new mobile-facing world. One of my heroes was Brian Rieger, and he said, I think a lot of web design in the past 5 to 10 years is actually just a reflection of print design again. We've been designing for one context, which isn't much better than the PDF document. And this notion was echoed recently on Luke Wroblewski's blog when he was saying our obsession with layout carried over from print design keeps us from seizing from bigger opportunities on mobile. Now, I think that while there may be a great deal of cognitive comfort in the page metaphor, in a mobile-facing world, we have to recognize that it's just not a scalable model. Instead, like stories from folklore, content needs to be able to shapeshift, to shift in form and scale and functionality as it traverses multiple devices. Now, you may be wondering, that sounds great, but how do we make this happen? How do we begin to dismantle these web pages and begin to reshape them into a model that addresses the needs of the contextual considerations that mobile environments present? And this is something that I've been doing a lot of thinking about, both for my work and for my book. And my research on this topic led me to the work of Lucy Suchman. Lucy is an HCI scholar and professor of anthropology, and in 2006 she wrote a book called Human-Machine Reconfiguration: Plans and Situated Actions, which admittedly is a very dense and somewhat at times sarcastic read, but it's really well worth it. And there are 2 theories outlined in her book that I feel apply to the design of multi-device experiences. And they are her work around situated action and her work around mutual reconfiguration. Now, in her book, she has this great anecdote that she had observed while she was doing some of her research at Park. And what she did was she was working on copy machines, and she placed a video camera in the copy room. And she observed how people were interacting with the copy machine. And she noticed 2 things. The first thing that she noticed was that people didn't really come to the copy machine with a real strong sense or mental model of how to operate it. Instead, they had this sort of ad hoc way of interacting with the copy machine. They would try something, sort of recognize mistakes that they were making, and then self-correct, which I think lies in sort of stark contrast to how we think about interaction design. The other thing that she noticed in these videotapes was that the way that people interacted with the copy machine varied greatly depending on who else was in the copy machine room. Right? There was a level of social context that really affected the way that people were interacting with the copy machine. So Suchman's theory was that this mutual reconfiguration that happens is that a person's capacity to act or their agency is reconfigured when it comes into contact with another thing or person, and that human action is constantly constructed and reconstructed from dynamic interactions with the material and social worlds. And what I think is really interesting about this is that Suchman's theory really had less relevance in the days of the desktop because the things that people came into contact were relatively common and predictable. But with the widespread proliferation of mobile devices, that no longer holds true. We have long known that one of the defining attributes of great mobile experiences is that they're sympathetic to the depth and the breadth of contextual considerations. And that's why I think Suchman's work has such dramatic implications for how we think about and design mobile computing experiences. I think there's basically two big design implications: that human action is constantly constructed and reconstructed from these dynamic interactions with the material and social world. I think the two big things that we need to consider are a shift in our contextual assumptions and a shift in our sensibilities around content as a design material. I'm going to break this down a little bit. What do I mean by this need for a shift in our contextual assumptions? Well, I think that if you think about the legacy of the desktop, we must really come to terms with the fact that how we understand computing today was forged in a very specific context, and that context was the office. And if you go out into the world and you observe people using laptops or desktop computers, you see this eerie sameness around the context of use. Next time you're at work, just look around and notice how the built environment of an office has been configured to accommodate your computer. And the UX processes and support mechanisms we use to create and validate our design work echo those conditions, as pictured in this usability lab, or this usability lab. But honestly, how many of you have ever seen a person use a mobile phone in this configuration? I don't think I've ever in my entire life seen a person in the wild use a mobile phone in that type of configuration. Yet, these are the tools that we use to validate our work. This is not the environment where people use mobile technology. Instead, they use it here. And so I guess if you think about the design process or the UX process, the double diamond process that we all know and love, it underscores how important it is for our design work to be situated in the context where it will be used at all phases in the design process. The Japanese have this phrase, go to the gemba, which roughly translates to go to the true place. And when it comes to designing for mobile and being successful at it, that is what I'm convinced we have to do, from initial user research to ideation and design, to usability testing and validation. If as UX professionals and interaction designers, behavior is our medium, our work must be situated in where behavior occurs, not in an office, not in a usability lab, but out in the world. It's the only way we will truly be able to accurately capture and accommodate how behavior is constantly constructed and reconstructed from these dynamic interactions with the world. So in addition to a shift in our contextual assumptions, I think we also need to shift our assumptions around content as a design material. So thinking about design, the very nature of it is being the manipulation of materials. It's sort of one of the things that Jesse was saying earlier. I think if you think of other mediums like fashion design, right, the design material is fabric. I think for a long time as web professionals and UX professionals, we've really thought of pages and screens as our design material. But I don't believe that's true anymore. Designers are no longer designing screens or pages. Instead, you're designing flexible systems that must accommodate these multiple content relationships. Today, I truly believe that we must get out of the screen or page mindset and start designing for systems. And this really requires for us to start thinking about content as our design material, that it's a fluid material, it's not locked into any particular format, but can traverse multiple contexts and devices seamlessly. I think we just have this really hard time separating, content from form, but it's something that we're really all going to have to make a shift in doing. And again, I saw this echoed in many of the expert interviews that I conducted for my book. One of the things that Stephanie Riegers was saying was one of the most important things was that they were doing was starting to look at writing and working with APIs rather than designing pages for one context. And Mike Kruseniski from Windows Mobile 7 said that for so much digital content, there is really no good metaphor to render anymore. The content is just information, text, and images, so new approaches to interaction, visual, UI design are needed. Now, I think we're starting to see a lot of this, the early beginnings of it with movements like responsive web design that really allows the pages to accommodate multiple devices, but I think there's greater opportunities to be seized with things like creating experiences that explore other senses like sound. Or experiences like Berg's little printer, which actually takes digital content and reverts it back into an analog form. But I guess the key takeaway that I'm trying to communicate with this theme is, how can we make the web be like water? What are the inherent material qualities of content, and how can we make it be like water, something that is fluid and can shapeshift through a variety of contexts and devices? So the next topic I wanted to cover was a brave NUI world. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the issues mobile user experience must contend with as we march forward is this legacy of the desktop. Now, the graphical user interface was designed with assumptions of a very specific context, with very specific considerations and assumptions. And those assumptions were things like the user will be seated in a relatively predictable environment. There'll be a large screen that they'll be able to have a large amount of real estate and enable multitasking. And there'll be a keyboard and a mouse for input. But while there may be a great deal of cognitive comfort in the metaphors and the principles around GUI, we're really reaching the edges of what it can do. Most software programs, like Microsoft Word shown here, are dying under their own weight. The psychological function of recall is just too challenging and time-consuming in the mobile context, especially with the level of complexity users are demanding. The thing that I love about mobile is that they've really brought with us the age of the NUI interface, and this is actually not terribly surprising. GUIs become fundamentally broken on mobile devices. The screens are often too small, the demands of the mobile context too great, and our needs around content are just significantly different than they ever were on the PC. We've really entered the age of the NUI interface. Now, the design and development of mobile devices outfitted with touchscreens has exploded since the release of the first iPhone, bringing with it the opportunity for users to experience firsthand the kind of magic of touch interfaces. Now, sure, many users may have had experiences with touch interfaces before things like the iPhone, like with ATM machines or train ticket kiosks. However, there was something so magical and so right about the combination of the mobile phone and the touchscreen interface that it created this fundamental shift in the mobile user experience field. And this trend in touchscreens really doesn't appear to be stopping anytime soon. And you may stop and wonder why. Why is it that touch interfaces feel so completely intuitive and so completely fun and engaging for people? And I think it's because our sense of touch is quite possibly the most innate and intimate sense we humans possess. Our sense of touch is the first touch to be developed when we're tiny babies and embryos in our mom's tummies. And it's the main sense that newborn infants use to learn about the environments that they're in. It's the sense that never turns off or takes a break, and it continues to work long after other senses fail in old age. Unmediated, direct manipulation of digital content through touchscreens is as close as we can get to tangible experiences in the digital world. Now, there's no one who probably knows more about NUI interfaces than the folks up at Microsoft who brought us the Surface Table. This is a great resource if you haven't read it yet. It's a little dense and technical in nature, but it has some great principles around how to design for natural user interfaces. And a few years back at UX Week, I actually had the pleasure of watching Dennis Wixon talk about his ideas around natural user interfaces. And one of the things that I really liked about his talk was that he actually positioned natural user interfaces in kind of a historical context. And he talked about some of the main characteristics of all the interfaces from the past and things that he believed will be present in the future. And what I thought was particularly interesting was that he stressed how we're sort of in this kind of transitional phase between the graphical user interface and the natural user interface. And I like to call this the NUI GUI chasm. And I think it's really important for designers and UX professionals today to really recognize that we're in this chasm. We're in between these two paradigms. One is our past, one is our future, and we really have to be conscious of the characteristics that define each and how they're different. So what are these key differences? I think on a high level, the GUI mental model, it really emphasizes that the computer is a tool that people use for tasks and to be efficient. GUIs rely on the psychological function of recognition. What you see is what you get. You see menu items, you click on them, you recognize what you want to do, and you click on that item. GUIs also give data physical properties. We create files that can be stored in folders that live on a desktop, that can be thrown away in a trash can. It really uses this idea that, digital, ephemeral data, it has these sort of physical properties. The visual language of GUIs is Chrome, icons, scroll bars, and buttons. Defining attributes of NUIs are quite different. The mental model for NUIs is that the computer is the distributor of media. Really, they rely on our sense of intuition and kinesthetics. So instead of what you see is what you get, it's what you do is what you get. NUIs are fluid and they're unmediated and they're organic. And what I think is really awesome about them is they let content be the star. And one of the things I think that designers have a really hard time contending with is that GUI experiences are really anchored, right? There's this feeling of gravity, that there's a top and a bottom, kind of like a Jenga tower. Whereas NUI experiences really kind of unfold. They don't have that sense of being anchored. Instead, they unfold like a game. And subsequently, a lot of NUIs can feel very anchorless for users. But I think it's really this notion of unfolding that is significant and really providing designers with the opportunity to create new design patterns. And there are unfolding patterns out there, but the 4 that I have been tracking and really did a lot of research for my book are these 4. The nested doll pattern, the hub and spoke pattern, the bento box pattern, and the filtered view pattern. So the nested doll pattern, if you've used iOS, email, you've experienced this pattern, right? It's this sort of overview to a detailed view of a piece of information. It's a very linear pattern in the way that it feels and moves. The hub and spoke pattern is something that you may have experienced if you've used Flipboard on an iPad. It's this sense that you can traverse out to different pieces of information but always come back to the hub, a lot like an airport hub for an airline. The bento box pattern is one that's really great for tightly nested pieces of information. So things like the Kayak iPad app, as well as the TripAdvisor iPad app, use this sort of sense that different pieces of information have an interrelationship, and you can present that in this kind of neatly compartmentalized screen design or image. And the filtered view pattern is really great when you have just a bucket full of information and you can visualize that information in a variety of different ways. iTunes is a great example of this. You can sort things through, genre or alphabetically, or through the cover art, through cover flow. But I think it's a great example of how different views will provide users with a different insight into what they're looking at. So these are the 4 patterns that I've been tracking. I'm sure there's many more out there. I'm sure many of the people in this room will invent some of their own. But I guess the big thing I wanted to say or wrap up with this topic is that we are situated in a very interesting place when it comes to UIs right now. We're in the process of traversing this NUI-GUI chasm. GUIs are our past, NUIs are our future, and inventing that future may require some creative leaps. So the final topic that I wanted to share with you guys was this theme that I've been calling comfortable computing. So this is an image of Mark Weiser, and I just love this image of him because I think it just makes him look like such a big teddy bear, and I just want to give him a hug. Anyway, Mark was a hero of mine, and he was the chief scientist at Xerox PARC in the United States and is widely considered the grandfather of ubiquitous computing. And what really cemented his reputation as the grandfather of ubiquitous computing was this seminal article that he wrote in 1991 that was published in the Scientific American. And it was entitled A Computer for the 21st Century. And there were 2 really significant things that are well remembered in that article. And the first is a quote found in the article that I think nearly every HCI paper on ubiquitous computing starts with, and has in many ways become this sort of rally cry for ubiquitous computing experience, which is that the most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. Like, what a wonderful rally cry to have, right? So human and so great. And the second significant detail of that article was that back in 1991, Weiser had this triptych vision of ubiquitous computing. He predicted back in 1991 that in the future, computing would exist on 3 scales: the 3-inch scale park tab, the foot scale park pad, and the yard scale live board. And now, some 20 years later, what do you know? And what I think has been one of the most significant aspects of this sort of widespread proliferation of this vision is that smartphones and tablets have really made ubiquitous computing not this sort of lofty subject that's abstract and academic that only nerds like these guys talk about. You know, mobile technology in many ways has become this sort of gateway drug for ubiquitous computing. Mobile devices are allowing people to experience ubiquitous computing in very visceral and tangible ways, and not through nerdy people we can't relate to. Instead, we can follow toddlers into the future. Now, outside the general form factor of the device, one piece that I particularly find fascinating is usage. Now that this triptych vision of technology is widely available, how are people actually using it? Now, one of the projects that I was recently a part of was a tablet study. I went out and I conducted ethnographic research of 25 tablet users. And there was one particular theme that emerged from this research that I think is highly significant, and that is around this notion of comfortable computing. Now, although tablets are widely considered mobile devices, the primary environment that participants that I spoke with reported using their tablets was in their homes. And however, unlike the PC or the laptop, whose physical affordances really lend themselves to a seated stance at a flat surface, participants reported using their iPad without the experience was like curling up with a good book. The light and portable form factor combined with the intuitive touchscreen interface made a better device option for casual content consumption in these sort of soft surface environments, in bed, on the couch, in front of the TV, or lounging in the backyard. On the one hand, what I saw was that the iPad is clearly used for task-oriented purposes like balancing checkbooks, paying bills, responding to work email, and I don't want to pretend like those use cases didn't get reported. But the stories I heard were overwhelmingly of a different kind. There was a sense of the sociality and intimacy that was articulated in both the user's body and their actions that was very poignant in all of the user's stories. And this is really what I would like to call comfortable computing. And what I find interesting is that it lays in stark contrast to Mark Weiser's vision for computing as it was outlined in that seminal article. Now, much of what we have thought about computing for the last 30 years have really been forged in that sort of context of the office, right? In that context of like people use computers to complete tasks and be efficient. And I think if you reflect on how we as a community of UX professionals and interaction designers have aligned our perceptions and our working processes to echo those notions as the computer as a tool, and it's something that people use to get things done. And I feel like what I saw out there in the field and what people were really articulating was something very different. Both the environments and the reported usage suggest that there's a wider spectrum of human experience that mobile technology can support that remains largely unexplored. People are turning to mobile technology to give them a sense of comfort and a sense of connection, which begs the question, how do we better support these needs? I think one tactical step is to start to say goodbye to this notion of tasks and say goodbye to this notion of done. Now this should look familiar. It's, you know, the old wireframe. And if we think about how the web has evolved to date, it's really evolved around this task efficiency model. But I believe that mobile can be different. If tasks are about completion, mobile can be about possibilities. And possibilities are interactions that accrue value over time or facilitate exploration, or about sensing intent. So what do I mean by these in sort of tangible ways? Well, if you think of the difference between sending an email versus Twitter, many people who don't use Twitter don't really understand what its value is, but it's definitely an interaction that accrues value over time. If you go to Google and you search for koi pond, you'll see what you see on the left. It's just directions for how to build a koi pond in your backyard, which lies in stark contrast to the koi pond iPhone application. Right? It's really about this sonic and visual world that you can escape to alleviate stress. It's really more of an interaction that facilitates exploration. And I think when you go to a browser on a PC, you know, it sort of stays the same. But one of the great things about mobile devices is they can sort of understand their orientation, right? In some ways, this is the early beginnings of being able to have devices that can sense our intent, and hopefully not in a creepy HAL kind of way, but in a way that is actually beneficial to people and not creepy. So to close out this theme, I think the central point I'm really trying to make here is that I think if you consider the vast spectrum of human experience from birth to childhood to adulthood, and feelings like love and comfort and connection, many of those things are not about tasks at all. They're about something much deeper and something fundamentally more human. And I think mobile technology is poised to better support that spectrum of human experience than any technology that preceded it. So just to close out, these are the three topics that I think will be important in the mobile user experience field. And again, if there's one thing that you take away from this talk, it's that mobile presents the opportunity to invent new ways for users to interact with information. And I hope that you can all really embrace this sense of invention. Thanks.